Most
Mhm.
people think it's easy. Oh, I'll just shut down the line. I don't know if you know this or others. It takes about a month to restart a quantum computer, and it takes a large amount of money to do that. At least $100,000 to restart a quantum computer. To restart a say manufacturing line.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth, and today with us we have Richard LaTulip. Richard, welcome to the show. Please give us a little background about yourself, what you've done, and kind of where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me onto the show today. A little bit about myself, right? So where did I come from and how did I get here? 1995 is when I joined the U.S. government. In 1998 is when I switched over to the U.S. Secret Service. And I think that's really where my journey became really interesting in that regard. I think a lot of people look at the Secret Service and they've seen the movie In the Line of Fire. They've seen Clint Eastwood running alongside of limos. And I can literally say that when I first started with the Secret Service, this is not something that we did. And even though the movies portrayed that. And so I think that is how people see the Secret Service. But the Secret Service has a dual mission. One is to protect the financial infrastructure of the United States, and the other is obviously to protect the president. The popular one, obviously, that everyone knows about is the presidential. But the unpopular one that most people don't necessarily automatically associate us with is the financial. And that financial journey is really where my career mostly partook, right? So when I joined the Secret Service, I'd have to say, 1998, a little bit behind in technology, but quickly when I was working investigations, I really focused on how the computer played a role in advancing criminal activity. And so I very quickly pivoted to a cyber, let's say, route, if you will, and joined our forensic program. That forensic program took me into a wide variety of other areas in the Secret Service, all still aligned with financially motivated threat actors. And so the dark web, not that it was new, but it became new to organizations like the Secret Service. And so we really started focusing on those who were working behind the computer and also those people who were doing what they could to stay masked. And so that forensics took me into undercover operations, where I became a cyber criminal, and I started working on forums, and I started, meeting with cyber criminals in the real world, to which I ended up writing a book about. It's called Operation Carter Kaos, which was the case title name. And so that took me from working there to then pivoting to international liaisons. And so I worked at the U.S. Embassy in Tallinn, Estonia, continuing to work with a wide variety of individuals internationally, focused on, that financially motivated cyber threat actor. After I was done with my time in Estonia and working with our international colleagues, I pivoted to our cyber threat intelligence section at headquarters. Here is where the goal was only focused on the most advanced threats that financial industry was facing. And so I ended up, working one particular case where, the hacker were taking advantage of the SEC, really the EDGAR system, and compromising a wide variety of those documents. And the case was huge because not only was it a critical, let's say, resource, which in a lot of any publicly traded industry relied on, but also the fact of the global criminal network and how far it spreads, right? You think that by stealing a 10Q or some other financially or company related document, okay, well, what's the goal? It's to get that document and to spread it to their network so people can illegally trade on those documents. So working to find that person, really kind of demask the individual and bring them to, that physical world was the journey. And we were able to do that. And so that was just one case of many, but identifying, locating, debriefing, and in those cases where we could, using them as an asset to continue that journey of climbing the ladder and being able to bring those who are the most disruptive to justice.
No, fascinating. So a couple things in that really piqued my interest is my background, and not everyone knows, is I started off in finance. My degree's in accounting. I worked in casinos for 25 years, and we had, CTRCs, we had FinCEN, we understood that. We ran across counterfeit currency, which Secret Service would come in and they would inspect and they would collect, and the financial piece of that. But you look at how that's evolved to, threat actors today and how it applies to the industrial manufacturing. Organizations today are not always hit on the industrial side. It's a business email compromise or something on the IT side, and then the threat actor will pivot to the manufacturing side, understand what's there. And in a lot of cases, there is a ransomware that is attached or some sort of demand for monetary value where they are seeking payment for keys to turn over the process back to them. I can see where even today, as we focus on just how do we help organizations secure and protect the industrial networks, there's the entire secondary financial side of that transaction that most organizations are like, the insurance company will pay it, or we're going to pay it and get it back. That's a whole separate piece of it. So that's unique in itself.
So I think you hit on a couple of interesting topics, to be fair, right? So we talk about ransomware. That's tip of the tongue for most of the people. It's a big concern, but this is where I start talking to just other persons. Like when I speak at a conference, I'll talk about the value of an information security management team. You brought up insurance, which is an interesting aspect as well. Do we rely on insurance, pay the writer, meet the contractual obligations, and then of course, we've saved the day, so to speak. Well, I think you need, say, a couple real world examples to understand your value. The value of an information security management team is to allow the business to operate uninterrupted. And by allowing that, we allow business to continue and the business to survive. Those are our main goals. And so we should understand what's most critical to the business. And then we need to understand how to apply that in terms of a strategy to protect that business so there's no interruption. Now, if we were to talk about value, just value alone, right? And I think a lot of security teams oftentimes start at the insurance ideology and also the ransomware payment. And this is not where you should stop, in my opinion, right? We need to continue down the line. And the reason why is because not are we asking for tools or we're asking for manpower, but we need to also show the ROI or even the justification of what can happen. And if we take MGM or if we take the recent Jaguar Land Rover exploit, that started off for more than likely the social engineering aspect. And I think we know for sure MGM was social engineering, whereas that they were able to get the toehold and then they would move into the environment. Now, you have two decisions to make at this particular time. Do you pay the ransomware demand of whatever it is the actor is asking, or do you now look at saying, we're going to recover our systems? In both cases, you look at the recovery of systems. So we start talking about not just our ransomware payment that is possibly going to be the cost of doing business, right? Or let's say restoring the business is a better way of putting at it. But if we choose a different route, which some organizations are choosing, now you start looking at manufacturing companies or even the production of your, say, business line. And MGM's example, they lost over $100 million in downtime alone. But we look at, say, manufacturing, and depending on what it is that you create and or deliver to the consumer, now you start having to look at what does it cost for you to be 1 week, 2 weeks down. I can tell you this, that people or organizations like AWS, Google, if you will, they know their profitability down to the second. And so they understand what a 5-minute disruption is going to cost them and a 1 week disruption is going to cost them. If you look at, the healthcare environment and you have a major disruption to a provider, it's not now hundreds of millions of dollars, it gets into the billions. And you look at JLR, That was 1.8 billion at the last time that I read it. And it's likely the number is going higher in terms of costs. Now you look at that value and you talk about the ransomware payment, you talk about downtime, and downtime is only getting worse for these organizations in terms of their costs. But it doesn't stop there. What if you're publicly traded and because of the incidents, you're not necessarily looking at all the risks that you face, and that can be introduced if you're not paying attention. Because remember, now the scramble between IT and information security management, or even the manufacturing line, is to bring the business back up and running. And so we may forget that we have obligations to the SEC, or say even in the EU GDPR. So we have to report within a very tight timeline, at least something. We have to tell them that there's been an incident or there's been something that's disrupted the business. If we fail to meet those obligations, then now you're looking at some type of regulatory fines that come along. And if you've lost even more than that in terms of data, and that data can be correlated to PII or PHI type data, then now you start looking at, well, is there going to be, and I guarantee you this, just like anything in life, behind the scenes, behind the mask, there is a lawyer waiting there to jump out of the shadows with a class action lawsuit to your business. And so when we need to take about, let's say, value, we need to look at it from a holistic picture that incorporates the entire business, not just a singular line of business.
Yeah, and I think that holistic look is what a lot of organizations are missing. They're seeing a piece of that. Insurance is a piece of the total picture. Production line is a piece of the total picture. Having a incident response plan that you practice and is well rehearsed before an incident is part of the picture. It's like a 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. You need all of it to understand the whole puzzle. You can't just use some of the pieces. And I think that you're right. In looking at it holistically, it helps an organization truly evaluate their risk and what is that risk, so that they can better define it to the board of directors, to the shareholders, to the regulatory requirements, whether that's SEC, that's private equity, that's whatever. And how do they begin mitigating and reducing that risk in various paths and methods to take a better approach? What does the cost of that look like? And it's different in every organization. You mentioned JLR and that the 1.8 billion and the effect that it's having on the UK economy as a whole, in trying to keep that organization afloat while they get back up and they start producing and they begin that ramp up. I think that all organizations realize the amount of time, effort, cost to recuperate, to restart production, to begin that industrial network flowing again is a challenge. It's not an overnight process where, if you look back at your example, MGM chose not to pay the ransom. They said, we're not going to do it. We're going to rebuild our network. On the flip side of that, most people don't know, Caesars, the exact same time frame, said, here's the money. Please give us the keys. And you never saw it in the press. You never saw anything with it. And they didn't have $100 million loss because that was a different path they chose to take. Right or wrong? I don't know that answer. But it was definitely cheaper and quicker on their behalf, whatever circumstances they evaluated to make that decision.
So go down the line of the holistic, which is interesting because the CISO role cannot be a, back of the house, lock your door, sit in a closet kind of job anymore. You need to really be social in what you do. That's why you have to understand the total business. You have to look at what's most critical to our business. What is it that I need to divert the majority of my resources to? In terms of a manufacturing line, right? Most people think it's easy. Oh, I'll just shut down the line. I don't know if you know this or others. It takes about a month to restart a quantum computer, and it takes a large amount of money to do that, at least $100,000 or more to restart a quantum computer. To restart a, say, manufacturing line, when you start looking at the programmable logical controllers and you look at how they are interacting with the servers, this is no small option for them, right? It could go a couple 100,000, or it could be $1 million or more of shutting down a line and restarting it. So, to your point, it's not a singular event if you shut down a entire floor. And by the way, a ransomware event to a critical manufacturer is a long-term cost, even if you did pay, right? It's not going to be easy. I'll pay the 25 million, I'll be back up tomorrow. That's not how it's going to work.
Right. No, totally agreed. So let's shift gears just a little bit. Your current role as a field CISO, what are some things that you're seeing today for Recorded Future, and kind of how has that helped you, I guess, gain insight into maybe what organizations are doing or maybe not doing that they should be doing as you're out talking to clients, talking to manufacturers, talking to industry, and what are you seeing?
I mean, I think it spans the globe, right? I mean, it's from a very little amount to a lot, and then there's this in between. And I think that the security program sometimes gets overlooked. And when it gets overlooked, it's because of a variety of things. I talked about it earlier, the ROI. Well, what's the ROI? It's an expense a lot of times. And so we have to constantly show the value of that team. But it's challenging because we do ask for the money. And if you protect an organization and the business continues to flow, well, then again, it's hard, right? It's hard to show that value on a consistent and regular basis. But I think that the organizations that really are, let's say, performing well and understanding, they're the ones that are investing in security. They're the ones that understand that it can be them at any moment. These are the corporations now that are looking a little bit further down the road and saying, well, what is our next threat? What is it that I need to be doing? Resiliency is top of mind for most organizations. You can define it in a wide variety of ways, but resiliency can be blocking the attacks. It also can be recovering very quickly, taking the, say, zero trust approach where I trust nobody, or taking the breach is occurred approach. And so I need to understand how to get my business back up and running. So, that's where a lot of the conversation is shifted, is that resiliency ideology. And so those that get it, invest in it. They're putting more money towards the idea because you're seeing that the headlines aren't going away. No. Organizations like Scattered Spider and the tactics that they're using, and we can talk more on it if you'd like, but let's say, forward thinking of what is going to be your threats. Currently, you look at Scattered Spider and their advanced social engineering tactics, it's got most organizations scrambling of how is the future is going to be even worse. When you start looking at agentic AI, that's a whole different ballgame.
It gives the adversaries let's call it a leg up, because at the end of the day, it is now taking and basically scripting as a person the things that they need to be better at social engineering, to be better at writing malicious code, to be better and quicker at executing on all the things they are doing nefariously. At the end of the day, it's helping them be a better bad person, period. So you're 100% correct. As organizations that are protecting critical infrastructure, manufacturing, industrial networks, we have to be 100% spot on every single time. They only got to get lucky once.
I think really is you have to be very agile. You have to be very responsive. AI has worked for the bad guy to make them more, say, effective, and let's just say that they're more capable and quicker, right? But our teams need to be the same way. So the agility of our teams and being able to identify, look, the quicker you can identify a database breach or compromise, the better off you'll be. And quite frankly, large corporations can measure this in large dollar amounts. So, it does matter that we catch it quicker. And we are using AI to our advantage as defenders, right? And we use it in a way that it can help us to identify these indicators of compromise so that we can respond. And so, when I talk about cyber threat intelligence and bring that to the forefront of the conversation, cyber threat intelligence can give you the leg up in terms of defending yourself from a potential breach by understanding not just who your adversaries are, but also the tactics that they're using. You also can use intelligence to identify how is it. If you look at, say, for example, most vulnerability management programs, they're tied to, internal documents that have a service level agreement. It could say anything, right? Each corporation defines it differently, but let's just say on average, if I pick 15 days to install a critical update within my organization because it's highly exploitable, you can look at this and say, okay, well, 15 days, but where are we achieving the mark? If you look at the statistics from a year ago, and the statistics are saying at day 30, there's still 85% of those highly vulnerable exploits that are still unmitigated. They're still open. And at day 55, it doesn't get better. It's still 50% at day 55. And if you were to understand that an adversary, this is according to CISO, right? If an adversary takes a minimum of 5 days to completely own an organization, we understand that we have to do better and we have to be quicker than the bad guys, those persons that are compromising our networks.
That's some very scary statistics when you think about as an organization. A couple things as we look forward, you mentioned AI and the way that it's advancing both sides. It's helping organizations automate and detect quicker. It's helping the bad guys to get in faster. So the scale and the time at which it's changing is exponential. What was perfect technology today is outdated tomorrow. And I cannot imagine where we're going to be in 12 to 24 months, giving all of the AI dominancy that's coming to the US and the hyperscalers that are building as fast as they can. You look at, Oracle and OpenAI and Google and Meta and everybody, and they're just buying this compute as fast as they can to train these language models. Where do you see us in 2 years? Is there even a crystal ball that could even guess what we need to be looking for to get us there?
Yeah, 2 years from now, it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about. If you rewind the clock and look back in terms of when the computer was invented and was brought to the market. And so they did these statistics of it took over 6 years for 75% of the population to kind of adopt a computer. You follow the trend. ChatGPT, it took a total of, I think it was something like a week or a month. It's somewhere very, very, very tight threshold for 75, and this was probably even more than 75% adopted AI that quick, right? So where does it go in the future? I'm hoping I'll be able to sit back and let a robot do the job for me that has a connection to me, right? To think like me, to be able to apply a strategy to an organization. So it's really hard to predict, but I think that you see out of all different regions of the world, you see the advancement of chip technology, you see the advancements of robotics, you see the advancements of AI. You see where we used to define a time frame where it was months. It went to months to detect a breach in which you had, right, as a team. Weeks to days to hours to minutes. You look at how agentic AI now is iterating on itself and it's thinking faster. It's executing commands. Now you can still keep a human in the loop. You can still to know what it's doing, but if you're an adversary attacking, say, for it could be a political reason, it could be for an espionage, by the way, too. Think of it from a multifaceted factor. It can be governmental. It also can be industrial. When I talking to companies about the risks to the infrastructure for an industrial organization, you have to think about the intellectual property in which you own. You have to think about the research and development that you put into whatever it is that you're focusing on that's going to be your next thing that you're bringing to the market. And if that were to be compromised, and if somebody was to go to market before you because they were able to steal your intellectual property, you can imagine the tragic nature for a business. That can ruin an entire corporation, and it can or set them back for a very long period of time. And so when you look at the agentic side of AI, you look at what it's doing and how it's being used today, it's only going to get scarier. I think also when you look at social engineering tactics, it's going to become more human-like. It's already pretty human-like, but it's going to get to the factor of, 10x. And, we're even cyber criminals, just like what I said for myself. a robot that's connected to me that thinks like and can take commands from me directly. It's going to be the same for them. And this battle is going to continue, and it's going to be more challenging. The investment for corporations is rising, but the cost of doing business, right, is rising in its entirety.
Yeah, it is. Those are all great points. And, I saw an article, I don't know, in the last week that, it was from one of the phishing companies that are out there promoting, we test your employees. We make sure that they're not clicking on something they shouldn't. And the thing was, if you think that testing your employees is a bad thing, what do you think that the adversaries are doing to them? Wait till they click on something that you're not sending to them.
You're absolutely right. I mean, leaving people with thoughts when I do speak at conferences, education, real world education, not annually, but you need to be more consistent. Quarterly can be the minimum threshold, I believe. In person needs to be added into that as a consideration, but I think that education cannot stop.
Yep. As we look to, if I kind of go back to your Secret Service days and the financial piece of it, as organizations are becoming more targeted, whether that's geopolitical, that is hacktivism, that is pure profit from Scatter Spider, and organizations like that are basically cartels for money. It is what they are. So as we look at that and ransomware becomes a bigger piece, do you see the Secret Service and law enforcement becoming better at maybe recovering part of that for organizations that do pay something? We heard, this was, I think, part of the Colonial Pipeline. They were able to get part of that money back. The trail is not easy. It's normally in Bitcoin or some other sort of electronic means. It's transferred within seconds of it going into an account to multiple accounts globally. What's our opportunity or chances of kind of helping to recover some as we go forward?
So law enforcement, this is kind of one of the things where when I was working in law enforcement, doing incident response and going to businesses, and I think at times it kind of left an empty feeling because our goal was to gather evidence and then target the bad guys. And there were times that we were successful, right? We got these financially motivated threat actors and we were able to arrest them, but to your point, sometimes, let's say, restitution was ordered by the courts in which they never had access to it. Colonial Pipelines was a great example of law enforcement being very successful of recovering keys and being able to get that ransom payment back. Lockbit, which was another great example with law enforcement in terms of a global operation in which a lot of international team, right, the team got together and they went after Lockbit and they did the same thing where they recovered a lot of these Bitcoin keys and passwords and codes, and they were able to use that to kind of get back some of that money and to return that restitution to victims of cyber crimes. But this is where it's a challenge, right? Because if you're a financially motivated threat actor, hiding or protecting your money is your number one goal, right? Yeah. And so I actually worked a big case with the U.S. Secret Service where I targeted some of the money launderers within the infrastructure, right? So we look at, say, for example, the threat actors where they're compromising the big databases. It can be Heartland Payment Process. It could be the Jaguar situation. It can be Colonial Pipeline. And sometimes we looked at that as an opportunity for success. But as we've gotten our successes in law enforcement, the adversary has changed their tactics and techniques, and they've gone further underground. They've learned better operational security measures. So they're hiding, you're using the internet for anonymity. And so the goal was for me saying, well, what is the key point of all of this? It's the money. So follow the money and you can peel back the layers of the onion and you can then identify those persons. And I think the government in a whole, right, is understanding that as well. And we're using as many of the resources as they can, to be able to identify where's the money going and how is it that we can get that back so that we can give back to those organizations. But it's definitely number one challenge. Bitcoin, well, I remember the logs when I was reading some of the logs and stuff. If you look at, say, the beginning iterations, when I first started doing my undercover work for Operation Carter Chaos, When I started doing that, we used MoneyGram and Western Union as a means and methods to send money internationally, globally, if you will.
Yep.
And the bad guys started having conversations a little bit afterwards, right? The conversation that they started having was, what can we use as a way to digitally move money that's a trusted criminal organization? Like, we can trust it being not necessarily 100% bulletproof, but moving to that bulletproof ideology. And so eGold came along. And so eGold was operating where you would trade ounces of gold or even less. You would see these bad guys writing in the comments line, for a case of beer. So they transfer an ounce of gold for a case of beer. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense, right? So you would say, well, you're not, as a money remitter, following the anti-money laundering or know your customer rules. And so we were able to team up and go after eGold and recover those databases. Huge success, right? Well, then they just moved over to a couple different others, but Liberty Reserve became that next opportunity for them. And I think if you look at Liberty Reserve, this was my opportunity, by the way, to be a billionaire. I missed it, but when Liberty Reserve was taken down by the United States government, then Bitcoin was, I think, less than $1. It was cents. When that happened, and that conversation of the digital bank was going on, and all of a sudden they pivoted to Bitcoin. Why did they do that? Was because it was highly decentralized. And so that person I was talking about earlier, that was laundering money for a wide variety of cyber criminal actors, they were operating out of an Eastern European country, and they would be meeting with people in subway stations and handing them bags of cash or keys to wallets or purses. And that was how they were exchanging and laundering money and continuing this going. But because it was so decentralized, the regulatory oversight of governments was limited and it was fractured. So that, let's say, what they wanted already existed in Bitcoin.
Yep. Part of that, I think, we as an industry have to get better at advanced notification. If I have an issue, I can't wait until I circle my attorneys and I circle my board and have a conversation, because 3 days after I've given money and paid it, I'm never going to see it back. If I can alert somebody immediately, it's time to value. If I call the Secret Service or the FBI or the local law enforcement within, hey, this just happened, I was forced to do this, I just said it, here's the information, and let them start sooner than later, at least in my mind, maybe I'm off base, but the chances of recovering are better than if I wait 3 or 4 days or whatever that requirement is to make the notification, then say, oh, by the way, I paid them $25 million. And you're like, well, that was 3 days ago. We had no chance of seeing that money now. So we as an organization, as an industry, it's all cloak and dagger. Oh, don't tell anybody that we had a breach. Because I don't want somebody to know that where my soft side is, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of taking your dirty laundry and hanging it outside to dry. And do you want the world to see it? And I think that currently, a lot of corporations are taking the tactic of, we're not going to put dirty laundry out there for the world to see because it's a brand issue. No one wants their brand to be tarnished. And beyond that, they also, let's say, the company secrets. They don't want people to know customer trust, if you will, and brand reputation. These are two huge aspects. And I think obviously the cybersecurity team plays a role in being able to provide that confidence. But to your point, the quicker you can have a conversation with law enforcement, the quicker you can start providing information, and meeting your own needs internally, right? Because we can't forget of how regulated businesses are. We can't forget of how, let's just say, delicate these things can be for organizations. So it has to be a good balance, but we definitely cannot forget about, let's just say, being a good citizen or being someone that is collaborating. Because quite frankly, and I talk about this too, is the more we collaborate, the more we partner, the better we are collectively, right? Collectively, you're stronger. Individually, you're weaker. And so the more that we can collaborate and provide that information, and this doesn't just go with database breaches, it goes with cybersecurity teams learning from one another and understanding what it is that you're using and that works and what is that you're using and doesn't work. And if we raise the bar and we raise it high enough, then the adversary might be discouraged from continuing their path of trying to compromise your organization.
Yeah, no, great insight. As we wrap up, if you were to put on your CISO hat and you were to pick some advice that organizations that you think would really make a difference in their journey, that something that you see has really helped someone that has taken it and implemented it, or where you see a gap? What would you say to listeners today that maybe could help them get a leg up on this wildly crazy journey that we're all on, and as fast as it's changing and as unpredictable as it is? What advice would you give?
Well, because I work with Recorded Future, I'd always say cyber threat intelligence is an important key. And I think it is. And I do believe that it gives an organization's a leg up. But if I was to pivot back and say, we've already talked about education, we've already mentioned about partnerships, but internally, right? Understanding and partnering with all of the different business verticals. Once you can do that, you identify the criticality of the businesses and you start to wrap protection around that. And then you add things like cyber threat intelligence to understand where your greatest threats are. You understand based on the criticality of what it is important to the business. And then you understand through, say, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that the adversaries are using. Now you are becoming more resilient, and we're moving down that path, and we're becoming more agile. And so when you wrap all those things around, and we have to understand why the education part is so important, is because our employees' greatest asset that the organization has, but also they can become the weakest point of an organization because they have keys to the castle. They have an entry point, a toehold into an organization. And from there, of course, everything that an adversary does only gets more, let's say the percentages continue to rise as they're able to, climb that ladder and to be able to, use the exploits that are internally from the toehold, right? Because you have that layered ideology, the defense in depth ideology, and then you add in, say, a team who's dedicated to cyber threat intelligence, who's looking beyond that and who's iterating on the possibilities of what, based on the current tactics. They look at, say, something that I've said before too, because I've had the comments to me is, no one told us that Scattered Spider had pivoted from industry A to industry B. And the comment that I make to some people is that not a single cyber criminal that I debriefed told me during my interview, well, I had access to industry A, but because I had been designated an industry B threat actor, I decided that I wasn't going to go into industry A. And I handed that off to somebody else that was identified in that realm of the world. So we need that cyber threat intelligence team looking beyond, whatever the box is that's our most likely, and saying, well, who right now is the hottest? Who is the one that's making the headlines? What is it that they're doing? How can I prepare better to be more resilient against the attacks that they're using?
And it kind of ties back to the beginning when the very first conversation we had was organizations need to look at this holistically. You need to look at every aspect and facet of it, and not just vertical or departmental, but how does the risk to the organization spread across everything that we're doing? I think it's important. Great conversation. I could pick your brain for hours. I don't know that we have time today, but it was, hopefully the listeners got some insight. I appreciate your time. Keep doing the work that you're doing. We appreciate your service to the country and the community and everything that you do today.
Yeah. And if I could just wrap up, obviously,
Absolutely.
like these insights and you like the conversation, you really want to know about what it took to penetrate the underground economy, I encourage all your listeners to Google my name, look for the title Operation Carter Kaos. It's 40 chapters of some of the most interesting and intriguing, undercover work. You get to read about me as from two different perspectives, right? One side as a Secret Service agent and the other side living a dual life as this cyber criminal, meeting with and working with bad guys. It's a super interesting read, and it can shed a lot of insight in terms of where we currently are.
Oh, absolutely. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes so that everybody that's listening can have access to that. I'll definitely get myself a copy of the book. I can't wait. So appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day.
Yeah. Thank you too. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.